I really loved this novel by Tina Makereti, where the Rekohu Bone Sings. I think it's going to be a really significant New Zealand novel that could well become quite famous because it deals with very interesting issues and a piece of New Zealand history that I personally knew very little about. What happened to the Moriori people on the Chatham Islands. Rekohu actually means the Chatham Islands. It's set 100 years apart. There are two sets of characters 100 years apart. In the 1880s you have Mary and a young man called Araya. And Araya has been a slave, literally a slave. He is a survivor from the massacre of the Moriori on the Chatham Islands. And so he is so socially inferior, it never occurs to Mary's family that there could be any involvement with them. They've grown up together, they have a strong emotional bond. As they become older, it becomes something different and they end up running away together. So that is one of the stories. And then 100 years later, there is a couple, twins born. There's two other people who are significant. One is Māori, one is Pākehā. Now they're born to Tui, who is a Māori woman, but Tui's husband is Pākehā, and this extraordinary thing happens with the twins. One of them is clearly Māori and one of them is clearly Pākehā. The boy, Bigsy, becomes identified with his Māori side as he grows up. Lulu is a bit lost. She travels in Europe, she comes back to New Zealand, she feels quite dislocated. And when their mother dies, they discover, once they go to the marae, all sorts of things they didn't know. Their mother has kept secrets, she's kept her whole background from them, and they finally inherit an old cottage on the Chatham Islands that they go back to, and Lulu starts to identify with her Moriori side. It's an interesting situation for Biggs because he is clearly identified with Māori and he doesn't really want to know what the Māori did to the Moriori on the Chatham Islands. There's a third strand in the novel that is very strong and quite sort of magical really and lovely. It's a voice, a disembodied voice, perhaps the Rekohu Bone Singing, and it gives you narrative information that you need. So it's a narrative device, but as the characters in the novel, these two threads 100 years apart, start to come to terms with what's happened to them, start to find their own identity, this voice starts to become more and more human. He's the spirit, if you like, of an ancestor slaughtered in the massacre in 1835, and he tells you the details of that massacre. The survivors of that Moriori massacre were made slaves, and there's a wonderful quote that he says when he's talking: "When you slave, everything inside you squeezed in tight. It's like being upside in a waka. Only the air left in the hull keep you alive. You kick with your legs to put your nose above, and you try not to steal all the air from your future self, because there's only so much, and you never know when it run out. That's slavery." It's a wonderful image. So it's dealing with racial issues and massacres and slavery, but it's also dealing with the importance of knowing who you are, where you came from, reconciling Māori, Pākehā and Moriori pasts, honouring your ancestors and respecting all three cultures. And I think that it's going to be a really significant book. It's a wonderful story, a fascinating piece of New Zealand history, and I think a very important book.